Netanyahu had a conversation with Vladimir Putin on the eve of the cementing of the strategic partnership between Iran and Russia, where he conveyed his disinterest in war. And Putin was said to have then conveyed that message to Iran. Israel often does this, where they use negotiations or they use intermediaries. They talk about they don't want war, and then they eventually strike and wage war. But there's all kinds of talks about Iran rearming, about seeking out. There's been a leak from Black Mirror about Russian weapons, for example, the Su-35 jets, and then now seeking Chinese weapons, air defense systems, even missiles, unmanned aerial vehicles and drones from China. This so-called ceasefire, some people have intimated it might be a prelude to Israel focusing more on Iran.
Well, just as a footnote, Iran International has nothing to do with Iran. It's a CIA, Mossad outfit. They're agents of empire. But the important thing, I think, is that President Putin put out this information, and I think he did it for a reason, because he didn't have to go public with it. I think he wanted to make it more costly for the Israeli regime if they did carry out a war, which I think is quite possible that they will launch another attack. And I think Iranians, I know that the Iranians are preparing themselves for that scenario. It's sort of like what Trump did, but Trump did it unwittingly, I think, when he said there's not going to be another war, and he stressed it. He said it, I think twice in that interview, and stressed that there's no more war. Well, if there is war, that is going to look very bad for Trump. If there is war, if they do wage another blitzkrieg attack against Iran, another unprovoked attack, it's going to be an insult to Russia and to President Putin, because it's going to make him look bad. And I think that's why President Putin did that. I think he wanted to put Netanyahu in a difficult position. This is just my personal interpretation. I'm not saying this based on any insider information. The Israeli regime, I mean, one of the things that we're always hearing is how the Israelis are winning and the resistance is losing. And I think we all know that Iran has been losing for what, almost 50 years now? We're always imploding, falling apart. Yeah, we're always falling apart. At least the Western narrative is consistent. We're always losing. It's always a defeat for us. But if Iran is losing, then why didn't the Israeli regime continue the war? Why didn't the Americans continue the war? I mean, if I was winning a war and I consider this enemy to be existential, then I just finished the job. It's obvious. But they didn't, because they couldn't, because they lost. And Steve Bannon, I think at least on two occasions, on two that I've seen, he put, he's very well informed. He said that Trump saved Netanyahu. He saved the Israeli regime because the Israeli regime was being hammered. And during the final days, the Iranians didn't need to fire so many missiles because almost all of them were getting through, because they were learning how Israeli air defenses and American air defenses were working, and almost everything they fired, they hit their targets. And increasingly, information is coming out that the Iranian missiles some of them hit very sensitive targets, and the damage was much greater than they were letting on at the beginning. Today, the Iranians are more prepared than before. And another thing, Danny, remember 20 years ago, 23 years ago, when Bush gave his State of the Nation speech to Congress, and he first used the axis of evil term for basically it was for Iran. It was Iraq under Saddam Hussein, their own agent. They gave him chemical weapons to wage war against Iran. Then they turned against him. I don't want to go into that, but your younger viewers should just remember that they gave him chemical weapons. They gave him chemical weapons to use against Iranians and then Iraqis. And then later they invaded the country and destroyed the country in the name of chemical weapons, which they no longer had. But, so it was Iran, Iraq, and North Korea, right? So Iran really was the focus of Western animosity because of Palestine, because Iran was independent, the only real independent country in the region. and probably in some ways the most independent country in the world, but also because of Iran's stance on Palestine. Well, today, the United States can no longer focus on Iran like it did back then, because that was the unipolar moment. That was the height of US power, and Iran was isolated. Now the United States and the West, their energy is focused on Russia. It's focused on China. It's focused even now on India and Brazil and elsewhere. They don't have the power that they had 22, 23 years ago. So they can say that Iran is falling apart all they like. They are in trouble, and the resistance is not going away. These think tankers in the United States, I heard this Sajjadpur person, who talks nonsense a lot, and others, I don't know what he said because I don't follow these people, but they've been talking about how Iran is weak. Well, we've been hearing that for many years. But what I'm seeing is a United States that's deeply divided. What I'm seeing is a United States where the middle class has collapsed. What I'm seeing is a United States where Charlie Kirk, when he's murdered, the narrative,
It's all in
the
Israel.
FBI narrative is all fake.
Right.
And regardless of who carried out the murder, it's definitely not what they say it is. And the fact that people immediately point fingers at the Israeli regime shows how discredited the political regime in Washington and the Israeli regime are, regardless of who did it. Regardless if you listen to Candace Owens and you're completely convinced or not, that's another issue altogether. You have a country deeply divided, where the armed forces are going into cities, where every time Trump opens his mouth against China, the stock market falls. This is not the United States that was what one Frenchman called at some point the hyperpower. We're not living in that world anymore. So I don't, regardless of what they say in these Western think tanks, they're not winning. They're losing, and they've lost the hearts and minds of the world. Their economies are floundering, especially the Europeans, and they're losing militarily. They're becoming increasingly desperate. This talk of tomahawks and all that, the stupidity of Western regimes and the escalation that they're carrying up, but they're losing. That's the point that I'm trying to make. They are not this empire, this empire that lasted for hundreds of years, which has been targeting the global majority, but also which targets their own people. People in the West are waking up to this. People across the world are waking up to this, and they do not have the power that they had before. So they can say what they want about Iran, the axis of resistance. We're always losing and being defeated. Fine, they can keep saying that. But at the end of the day, if the Israeli regime strikes Iran, they can kill many of us. They can silence many of us. But they're going to lose the war, and they're going to be people better than the likes of myself, who will come out and raise their voices and continue the struggle against the apartheid regime, and this regime will ultimately collapse.
They're really depending on sanctions, the United States in particular, really depending on sanctions. Trump has recently come out and said that Iran will want to come to the table because these sanctions are so devastating. Well, Iran's oil boom, it is being claimed by experts who follow this, that they're ramping up production back to 2024 levels, and China and Russia being major buyers. Donald Trump himself at the Knesset said something to this effect. He said that Iran is ready to essentially capitulate.
Quit funding their militant proxies and finally recognize Israel's right to existence. They have to do that. They have to do that. And to Iran, and as you know, this is not said out of weakness. There's no weakness. But I'm going to say this, that we are ready when you are, and it will be the best decision that Iran has ever made. And it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
This is the guy who said in Truth Social, unconditional surrender.
Right.
When the Israeli regime and the Americans were launching their war against Iran, as Iran was negotiating,
Right.
He said unconditional surrender.
I think it's just important to step back and consider what it is the United States and Israel want from Iran, and Trump was being honest in that Truth Social post back during the Israeli aggression, which is unconditional surrender. Their problem with Iran is that Iran is sovereign. That's their problem with it. They do not like sovereign countries that make their own decisions. They like vassals. They like countries like, Egypt and Jordan and the Gulf regimes and the Europeans, the European Union, all these little poodles that do what they're told. That's what they want. They hate sovereign countries. That's why they hate Iran. That's why they hate China. That's why they hate Russia. That's why they hate Venezuela. And they gave the Nobel Peace Prize to this fanatical Zionist right-wing woman who is saying that, if she ever comes to power in Venezuela, she's going to sell everything off to American corporations, particularly the oil sector. She says that openly. So, of course, they love her for that.
And she wants Netanyahu's help to
Yeah,
overthrow the government.
basically, U.S. and Israel, please invade Venezuela.
Yeah, basically. So that's
and this tells a lot about Norway, by the way. And this says a lot about these very civilized people and the Nobel Peace Prize and all that.
100%. But that's the bottom line. So the question is Iran ready to surrender its sovereignty against promises of, I don't know, more fast food joints in Tehran or whatever it is you get from joining the declining American empire? So is Iran ready to surrender its sovereignty? Is Iran ready to sell out its principles? Is Iran ready to bow to Israel? Is Iran ready to, to surrender to an erratic, delusional figure like Donald Trump? I don't think you need to be an Iran expert to know that there's probably almost no constituency for that Iran. Yes, there may be a few, in every country, there are a few delusional people who worship the United States and who think the United States is like God. But I suspect that the vast majority of people in Iran don't want to give up their sovereignty and don't want to surrender to the United States and Israel, notwithstanding whether they want more cultural, what it is, exposure to this, or, a different cultural liberal lifestyles or whatever it is they want. But that doesn't necessarily mean they want to see their country destroyed and surrender. So from that very basic set of principles, I can't see how Iran would be willing to do what Donald Trump says he wants them to do. And then also, even if Iran said, okay, we want to make a deal, we want to just get all this over with, how do you make a deal with these people when you don't know from one day to the next if they're going to stick to it, if they're going to murder you while you're negotiating with them? So it's just entirely delusional. And I suspect that in Tehran, in Beijing, in Moscow, in countries all over the world that aren't already poodles and vassals of the United States, they understand that you don't necessarily want to go into a full-scale war with the United States. You want to avoid that, like avoiding, a dangerous wounded animal. You want to stay far from it as much as you can, but you're certainly not going to offer yourself up to it.
Israeli media said it itself, Professor Marandi. The focus is shifting, even if there's all kinds of attempts to confuse the narrative. Israel's focus, this is Israel Hayom, focusing on shift is on Iran as the next war looms. So I just want to read this, where it says, they appear to be ahead, Israel and Iran, on a path toward renewed confrontations, build up of ballistic missiles by Iran, and then, of course, this ongoing talk about enrichment at Natanz and a rebuild up of that. And then, of course, the sanctions and the lack of Iran negotiating now with both Europe and the United States as being possible triggers. All of this just sounds like recycled narratives.
To be very brief, if there's another war, I'm sure the Israelis will slaughter innocent people as they do. That's what they in order to kill one scientist, they slaughtered 70 people in a building. That's just who they are. Just like in Lebanon, when they would bomb apartment blocks and bring them down, and what the Western journalists in Beirut were calling these Hezbollah strongholds they knew they were lying too, just like the Israeli regime, because their fixers were from these neighborhoods, their drivers were from these neighborhoods. They just knew that they were bombing people. So in the West, if they bomb, destroy, bring down a building in Tehran, they'll call it an intelligence coup instead of what it really is, and that is just mass murder. Because everyone's home, everyone, people know where they live. People live in ordinary homes in Tehran, just as they do in other countries. But one thing that I'd like to just touch upon very briefly, and that is that one of the things that has been exposed is that this Orientalist stereotype in the West, among Western elites, has been demolished. They always say that, like in the West, they have civil society and they have checks and balances, and that the state is not dependent on people and that sort of thing. And of course, they're oligarchies, as we've seen, especially now in the United States, where the Zionist oligarchs are increasingly in charge, and as Trump admitted in Palestine himself. But we've seen the Israeli regime murder commanders in Iran, in Gaza, in Lebanon. We've seen them murder politicians. We've seen them murder scientists. We've seen them murder people from civil society. Iran is not dependent on any individual. Hezbollah and the resistance is not dependent on individuals. Even though Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was one of the greatest men of our era, Gaza and Palestine is not dependent on individuals, even though Yahya Sinwar is an icon of resistance for the world. There are thousands of Yahya Sinwars. There are thousands. We are all Nasrallah. And in Iran, it's the same. So the next time they attack, they will lose. There's no doubt that the Israeli regime will lose. So why will they probably attack? Because this regime is not rational. The Zionists are not rational. They are bringing about their own destruction. The fact that the world despises them is because of their own stupidity, because they have not behaved rationally for 2 years now. Netanyahu is fighting for his political survival, to stay out of jail. He's aligned himself with the most fanatical of the fanatics, but they're destroying the Israeli regime. So we shouldn't expect irrational people to behave in a rational way.
I just want to emphasize again that the solidarity from people all over the world has been absolutely crucial to this global sea change in support for Palestinian liberation and in isolating the governments. Yes, they're still very powerful, but these governments that support this genocidal regime are increasingly isolated and exposed even before their people. So just to thank people and say, keep it up. Your solidarity makes a difference. Don't relent. We have to keep going. Nothing has been solved yet. This is just a reprieve for the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine more generally. And when Palestine is liberated, I really do believe that is the keystone to liberation in so many ways for people all over the world, to free us from the grip of this bloodthirsty empire.
Oh, no, I totally agree with that. It's just even just from the standpoint of these countries like China, Russia, Iran trying to build a multipolar world. Free Palestine is really the only way
of
to
the United
win.
States.
Yeah. Oh, and that
Yes,
too. Yeah.
For the Israeli regime to just fall apart, it's to the benefit of the United States, it's to the benefit of Europe, it's to the benefit of everyone.
Of course. Yeah.
And
Everyone.
most importantly, perhaps alongside the Palestinians, it's to the benefit of Jews who are against this genocidal regime.